one of the key things that I know you've often expressed to people is that your research, the 12,000 hours, much of it is primary. You know, so with that, I wanted to ask about the elders and the families who actually taught you about polygamy and some of those other primary interests that you were able to tap into.
Back in, I believe it was about 2006, I started a medical apprenticeship with an MD here in Georgia, and he would always talk about polygyny. And I had seen the word before, but I'm like, okay. In fact, you know what? When I met him, I believe that I had only seen polygyny once, but he began to really expound on polygyny. He wasn't in a polygynous marriage, but he was married to the same woman for 20 years. He has half a dozen children, and he had been in courtship a couple of times with the second wife. And I remember, because he celebrates African culture, as a corpus of knowledge, he was teaching this to me. And he would always talk about it, and I'm looking at the time, I wasn't that gung ho about it. I just, I said, it makes sense. But he was always in my face about polygyny, and I'm looking at this. I got to be honest, man. I was looking at my elder like, man, you out of this world with this polygyny, man. Because he was always talking about it every time I saw him. Every time he got on the phone, he'd be like, well, in ancient Africa, we practice polygyny, so all of this stuff doesn't really matter. I was like, what are you talking about? And finally, I got also with an elder who is, he's a lineage holder from the Igbo tribes. He's a lineage holder in a martial arts system that he created. That he got, the center of, and then he built around it. And he would always talk about polygyny. And he was an Igbo, Nigerian, Hebrew man, and he was just always talking about polygyny. It's like, if you find any polygynous women, there's a lot of virgins still left in America. You need to get with one of these virgins and build a polygynous family. I'm looking like, man, what is it about this polygyny, man? But they taught me how to have a very ancient mind state when it comes to polygyny. And when I finally got around to living with several polygynous families, they were non-Mormon and non-Muslim. I mean, it was very practical. Everything they were telling me was very practical. One man was he was just a brother in the community. He was all for helping black people rise and empower us and things like that. And he was always busy in the community. And this was up in Maryland. There was one man who was Hebrew. I met one guy who was Messianic. He didn't consider himself a Christian, but he was Messianic. And he followed many of the scriptures and ways of the ancient Hebrew sages. There was another man who was also Hebrew. He came out of one of the American Hebrew camps, and he was forming his own he had his own compound, and at the time was courting a second wife. So I had one guy. I lived with one guy. He had two wives. He had three. Another man had four. Another man had two. Yeah, two of those guys had two wives. So here I am, actually living with them, seeing what they do every day, except the Messianic, his wives were scattered, so I only met one of his women. The others one lived out of state, and the others lived in a different part of the state I was in. I was on the West Coast. But I learned so much by watching them and listening to the practical advice. And I would share, because they would ask me, what have you found in your own research, and what do you think personally, how do you think that you would practice polygyny? Because at the time I was unmarried. And they said, okay, well, they would tweak some of what I was saying. They're like, well, you want to watch out for this, because this is what you're going to have to, look for in your women. Or a lot of them, they took on what I was teaching, because I just had my own ideas based on what I know of the world. So that's where that comes from. Of course, I told you about my childhood. I came up watching this minister in our church. He was very ingratiating toward my mother, and I saw them love each other. They were very, very nice to one another, and I never saw him disrespect my mother.